Dave, I'd like to start at the beginning, actually before you. I'd like to know a little bit about your family, your parents.
Okay. So long term, my ancestors on my father's side came from Scotland, and they were relocated in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, to help suppress the Catholics.
Yeah, Scotch-Irish.
Yeah, Scotch-Irish. My family religion was Presbyterian, which is actually the Church of Scotland, so that goes back hundreds of years. And as a result, for our weddings, we wear kilts. So, and my mother is largely Swedish, and my parents met in Illinois. It was right. They were graduating from high school. My grandfather had served in World War II and lived in San Diego and moved away, and my father was going to join him, but he couldn't leave his high school sweetheart, so they got married right after he graduated from high school, and then moved to California.
So you were born in Illinois, but they were quickly...
Yeah, I've been here since before I was 4 years old.
Okay. So essentially California is the environment in which you grew.
And I'm a California boy.
And it's around LA.
Yes, in the beaches of Los Angeles, Redondo Beach and Torrance.
Which have gotten a lot more fashionable than in our days since
I was just here this weekend, and they're pretty expensive places to live now.
Amazing. But not in our day. I say our day because I grew up not far from you. Okay, so this is a family, I don't mean educated, but professional?
So no one had graduated from college in either branch of the family. My dad started going to college in Illinois, and then they couldn't afford housing in Illinois at the time. So at the time in 1951, housing was cheaper in California than Illinois.
Hard to imagine. Yeah.
So they got in the car and drove to California, and he had finished, I think, his junior year at Northwestern, or was partway through his junior year. And his plan was, coming out and raise a family and go part-time to finish his bachelor's degrees at USC. So we became a family of four. I was the oldest.
Yes.
And after, more than 10 years going part-time, and he hadn't yet finished, his joke was he wanted to graduate from college before I did. But he lost that bet.
He lost it.
I graduated from UCLA, and then he graduated from University of Southern California a couple of years after I did. So I was the first of my college to graduate.
And your mother never did?
No, she unfortunately, very smart. She got bad advice about going to college as a woman graduating from high school in 1946.
Exactly.
And kind of missed that window of opportunity, and then had me, and then two sisters and a brother, and kind of got tied up. Didn't get that chance.
Fair enough. A household full of books, parents with ideas of what you should do,
No, they really encouraged, school was important. The thing that my parents tell me now is what they did was they'd sit around the kitchen table, and as all the kids got older, they would help with the homework. And what they noticed was that I would answer a lot of the questions. When my kids, younger siblings would ask a question, I just taken the material, so I'd try and answer it. And so eventually, my parents didn't show up at the table anymore, and it was just the four of us, and I would help them out. And my sister, who was the next oldest one, also would help, and both of us ended up in education. She was a high school teacher, and I went to, taught at Berkeley. So I'm pretty sure that growing up experience, explaining things to my younger siblings, influenced my love of teaching.
Excellent. So I'm assuming you went to a public school, not a private school?
Right. When we grew up in Southern California, the only private schools were for the Catholic kids, the private schools, and if not, you went to a public school.
I remember that actually private schools were for the kids who couldn't make it in public school sometimes.
Yeah, if there were private schools, they were for
not Catholic schools, but
not the Catholic
the other
schools.
ones.
They were for kids who couldn't make it in the public schools.
Okay, so solid elementary education, good teachers.
In high school, elementary school, I don't think there was anything special.
Right.
It was a good suburban school.
Right.
High school, I was fortunate to have a really great math teacher. And they really didn't teach calculus in high school where I went, but he was a broad guy who could do many things, and so he was able. We got up. I was put in the advanced math class, and was able to get to calculus there. And when people asked me what I wanted to do when I went to college, I had no idea. But my high school math teacher always wanted to be an actuary. And so when people asked me, I would say an actuary. I didn't really know what an actuary was. I've heard recently that an actuary is like a bookkeeper without the scintillating personality. But he was like, that's what he wanted to do.
And that was your answer.
Yeah.
And that was your answer.
And no computers at all. You know, I had never thought about computers. I knew they existed, but didn't really cross my mind.
There's another factor I want to know about the young Dave. Because I've talked to your future colleague, and he said he was lazy. He knew he was pretty smart in elementary school and high school, but he said he really needed, and it didn't happen until he went to Catholic school, he needed someone to say, you know, don't be lazy, you know, what were you? Were you hardworking?
I was pretty hardworking. I think one of the things that really shaped me as I think about in high school is I was small. I was both one of the youngest people. My birthday was just before the age cutoff, so I was almost always the youngest person. And I think my family kind of matured late. So I was a small person. When I was a freshman, I probably weighed 100 pounds. And
Really?
was 5'2".
A freshman in high school?
Freshman in high school.
Oh.
And then but for some reason, my parents thought I'd be good at wrestling. I have no idea why. But I wrestled all the way through high school and then in college. And so I think wrestling was a big experience to shape me. And then wrestling uses up a lot of time, and it takes a lot of discipline. Not only is it tremendously physically demanding, there's weight classes, so you have to diet so that you get your optimal weight class. So I think there was a lot of discipline around being able to participate in sports, and it used up a fair amount of time. So I think the parents' example of course, everybody's going to do their homework, and then being in a family of 4, having your responsibilities in the wrestling, I think I worked pretty hard.
Well,
or at least kids work really hard today. For that era, I was a hard worker.
Got it. And for California. Okay, so you've already been noticed by your math teacher in the sense of having somebody with ability.
I want to tell you one more
please,
story.
Please.
My mom. So I got sick when I was in 8th grade, and I missed a couple of weeks of classes. I don't know why. So I had to make up a bunch of tests, and when I was making up the tests, I thought I saw the answers imprinted. You know, I could see the dents in the paper, the numbers, and I was way behind. So I just started copying the numbers down to try and catch up with the class because I was so far behind. And I thought that was a shortcut. So my 8th grade teacher just thought I was an idiot. And he came and interviewed my mom for the parent-teacher conference, and she said, you know, not everybody's cut out for college, and I think you know, your son absolutely cannot take algebra there. So, my mom, who has a sense of temper like me, just was umbrage. But I was forced between my 8th grade and freshman year to take a general math class in summer school to prove that I could take algebra.
Extraordinary.
So
it's the opposite of a mentor. It's
a
doubter.
And I think my mom to this day wished she could go visit his grave and let him know that
how wrong.
Yeah, this guy who he didn't think was could go to college actually
did okay.
Did okay.
Okay, so still, I'm sorry, I'm going to make you a senior.
Okay.
You're going to have to face the ideas. By then, somebody's figured out you're ready for college.
Yes.
How does the decision go to where you're going to go?
So I have next important part of my story is I have a high school sweetheart that we started dating my junior year. Her name was Linda Crandall at the time, and so I applied to UCLA and get into UCLA as a senior. But now it's kind of like my dad. I have to make this decision. I realized at the time that if I go off to college, you know, the chances of Linda and I drifting apart are probably pretty high.
Right.
And I asked my mother recently about this decision. She said the other thing that influenced my decision is, do I want to go to UCLA or do I want to go to the local community college, besides my girlfriend, was the wrestling team. So the wrestling team at El Camino College was great. In fact, it was, even though it's only a 2-year college, it was a better wrestling team than UCLA. So she said, the wrestling team influenced my decisions. So some combination of my girlfriend and the wrestling team got me to go to El Camino Community College.
You went to El Camino first?
I went to El Camino, and rather than went to UCLA.
Wow. Okay, well, I'm going to have to help you deal with that decision. So you're there for 2 years?
2 years.
The full
I'm
2
on
years?
the wrestling team both years. We win the state championship my first year, and I'm not that good, but the second year I become Southern California champion. So for the wrestling,
that was the
great.
best decision.
Yeah.
And for the love, that was
and
good.
yes, and then we maintain. The more important thing is my girlfriend, who became my fiance, and then we got married right after my junior year. Now, part of the reason for that, from the Patterson history, is my dad graduated from a community college and then went to Northwestern, but he never finished his bachelor's degree. So my parents were worried that we would follow in their footsteps, is that I wouldn't have any degree of any sort, and that would limit my career opportunities. So
I would have worried
they kind of, at the time I needed the permission of my parents to get married. If a man was under 21, women could be 18, man 21, need that permission. So they told us, get your Associate of Arts degree before you get married, just because you never know what's going to happen, right? So that allowed us to get married after my sophomore year.
I'm going to presume to say something, since we both came from the same area, and I actually took some courses at El Camino, but when I was in high school, so I know it. I'm going to suggest that 2 years were intellectually wasted, if not morally and so forth.
Yeah, I did pretty well in the math classes. In fact, I remember my wrestling coach. A lot of the wrestlers weren't great scholars, and he had this rule: is you can't take math, or you can't take advanced math. And he didn't know I was taking calculus. He found out later that I was doing it. But I remember being in the classroom and being able to work out some of the equations for the instructor on the blackboard.
Amazing.
So it probably the math didn't challenge me, but the other classes were really good. The philosophy and other classes were fine.
Okay.
And the wrestling was a really great experience. As I say when I give talks, is I was blessed with both a high school coach and a wrestling coach who believed that we would be more successful if we formed a team. That if we could blend the personalities together and bond as a team, even though it's an individual sport, there's no tag team or anything like that, that we would be more successful. And so I think part of my skills is I'm good at leadership and forming teams and stuff like that. And I absolutely got that from wrestling.
And plays well with others. We'll talk about that at the fundamental stage of your career too, because it's not true of everyone. But UCLA decides you might have a talent enough to go to UCLA after finishing.
Yeah, well, they let me back in after. They didn't send me back.
They didn't send you back.
Yeah.
Okay, so now tell me the stage of education in computers or math or whatever it is you decide to specialize in by going to UCLA.
Well, I would say I thought of myself as a math major at El Camino.
Okay.
I don't know if he actually had to pick a major. And then that's what I did at UCLA. And I'm in my junior, I'm married, I'm working at my dad's factory to support, my wife's working too, support ourselves as a college students. And I'm a math major. And then UCLA was on the quarter system, or still is on the quarter system.
Right.
So I'm 2 quarters into my junior year, and then for my spring quarter, the math class I wanted to take was canceled, and so I had to find a replacement. So I just kind of looked in the catalog and, there's a computer course. I guess I'll take that. And in fact, as I look back, it wasn't even a full semester course. It was only it was 2 units where most courses were 4 units. So it was a half course. I guess I'll take that. So I take it, and of course, in that era, this is 1966.
Right.
It's punch cards and Fortran, right? But as amazingly as it's hard to explain, it's kind of like old video games. Back in the day, they were very exciting, despite how primitive they look. Same thing was true with programming. Here it was. I could get these ideas to come alive, kind of my brain would come alive. And even today, people talk about, when they're talking about the program, they anthropomorphize. Then I test this thing and I do that. And these ideas come alive inside the computer and they work.
Yes.
It's what Brooks Clock stuff gets created. So I was hooked. That was it. I had found the thing that I wanted to do. The math was getting more abstract. but the computing was exciting and concrete. So this is before UCLA had an undergraduate degree in computer science.
Yes.
So, but my senior year, I took every computer class I could find. The business school taught some, engineering taught some. I took every single course I could. Then what happens to me in my senior year, it's actually, I think at the end of the winter quarter, so I've got 1 quarter left of my undergraduate education. And at the end of a course that I did well in, after the course was over, I just casually mentioned to the person teaching it that, boy, I'd sure rather do computer stuff to pay for college than to work in my dad's factory in downtown LA. And it was an innocent comment.
Yes.
But this young faculty member took it upon himself to go find me a job as undergraduate. And he talked to several projects, and he found me a position to work at on one of the research projects. And so I started working there, and everybody else was a grad student. And I really liked it. And so I talked to my wife, well, what do you think about me getting a master's degree? And she said, well, and I said, it's, a master's degree is pretty efficient, it's only 1 year. She said, sure, why don't you go do that? And so I applied pretty late in the process to get into graduate school with a master's degree, which, because I was worked as undergraduate, I was able to get in. But up until, had that professor not got me the job, I certainly wouldn't have gone to grad school.
I think we need his name. You remember?
What?
Do you remember his name?
Yeah, Jean Loubert.
Okay.
Jean Loubert. I have thanked him profusely over the years.
Great.
But it was the kindness of his heart that he made that happen, and it completely changed my life.
He might have sensed you had some talent.
It's possible. It's possible he thought I would be useful as an undergraduate and would sponsor me as a grad student.
So there was such a thing as a master's degree in computer science at that point?
The graduate programs in computer science started popping up in the mid-'60s, right? So
just ready for you.
Yeah, the first PhD in computer science is maybe Purdue or Stanford in '63, and so they started quickly coming. Many UC campuses had PhD and master's programs, but the undergraduate thing was going to come later.
Now, I'm assuming you had to do a master's thesis, maybe not comparable to a PhD, but it's a serious project. What was that project? I don't know if I remember my master's degree. I don't think I did. No problem.
The dissertation, I'm going to have to look that one up. I have no idea.
Clearly you're in a process, because at some point you're going to go beyond a master's.
Yes, so I should tell the rest of the story. So I go to graduate school, and in my office is of 4 people. The other 3 all getting PhDs. So I go back and tell my wife, after probably pretty early, I said, well, what do you think about me getting a PhD? And we had nobody in my family going to graduate school. As far as I knew, a PhD, that's a doctorate, so it's like a medical doctorate. It takes you 4 years. Right. So that's what I knew. And she said, well, if you're smart enough to get a PhD, you should go ahead and get it. Now, what had happened at home is, we were the oldest ones in our family and the first one to get married. So they told us to wait a while before we had kids. So we waited a whole year before we had kids, which seemed like a long time for us. But by the time, about the same time I graduated from colleges, I became a father. So I was going to graduate school with a wife and an infant. And she was staying home taking care of the infant. And
where was the money coming from?
Well, we lived on a research assistant salary of 20 hours a week, which was not much money, very small. In fact, we qualified for food stamps. We qualified we were officially poor by standards, given how much money we had and where I went to school. And then while I was a grad student, my second son was born about 20 months later. So we then became, living on our 20-hour-a-week RA salary with a family of 4.
But you must have known this was the right track. Something in you was telling you this is not just an indulgence.
I'm naturally optimistic. We were living in UCLA's merit student housing. We were enjoying ourselves. There were lots of other young families there. We couldn't afford to have a car. We made ends meet. There was this entrepreneurial person in UCLA's merit student housing who had contacts in Hollywood, and he said, well, how would you like to have babysitters when you go out at night who are graduates parents who are graduate students at UCLA be your babysitter. What would you think about that? So that was a pretty popular notion. So my wife and I would take turns tricking the Hollywood celebrities by riding our bicycles to their house, because we didn't have a car, or they'd give us a whole dollar for fuel. Well, we would just pocket that dollar because we rode our bikes there.
Wow.
And we would babysit, Hollywood celebrities, and that, helped make ends meet. And there were places we went that had Oscars on the mantle there, right? And we would ride our bikes or babysit and head back. So we helped, we would supplement our incomes that way.
Now,
and my parents lived lived 30 miles away.
That's right.
And they would,
give you a hot meal every once in a while.
Yes, they would pick us up and take us into Westwood at UCLA, and take us to a movie, and take us to the Mario's
and maybe
restaurant.
even babysit every once in a while.
And babysit once in a while. Yeah,
right.
we didn't. But we didn't have. They didn't give us financial support, but they
Right.
give us kind of a emotional support. And when my wife was pregnant, they loaned us a car so that we could get her to the hospital.
Now, you couldn't remember your master's thesis. I'm just guessing you can remember
I
your
can remember my
PhD.
PhD.
Okay, so get me to the thesis that you remember.
Well, no, the next part of the story is maybe 3 years into this RA ship, the grant ends. And there's not a follow-on grant for me to get on, so I need to find a job. My advisor helps, or I guess he makes the connection with a local aerospace company, Hughes Aircraft, which is located in Culver City, which is 6 or 7 miles from the UCLA campus.
Right.
So I go there and get interviewed, and I'd taken some hardware classes, but I thought of myself as a software person. Well, this job was to build computers for airplanes, so airborne computers. So I got tested on my ability to understand hardware and computer architecture, and I passed that test. But that became my practical education in computer design. It was building computers for Hughes Aircraft. And
Did that excite you? Or were you feeling this
yeah.
was a kind of byway until you got to what you really wanted to do?
I would say I was just thrilled to have a job because I wanted to finish, I'd started the PhD. I wanted to be able to finish. They were willing to let me work part-time while I finished my PhD. And so we made a lot more money working 20 hours a week at Hughes than being an RA.
Right.
So I think we were very happy to get the job. And then maybe it's kind of my natural optimistic nature, and there were great people to work with. There were other people who were working on their PhD in this group, so
Right.
it's great people to work with. And we got to design computers, which is a very exciting thing. There's that excitement of software, if you got these ideas in your head and you see it come alive in the computer. Another very exciting thing is to design hardware and see it built and work. I got an excitement from that as well. So to me it was, that's how I would pay the bills while I got my PhD, and it was interesting, but I didn't actually say, from now on I'm only building hardware. I felt I could do both now.
I still want to find out your PhD thesis.
So at that time, the way computers were built was the hardest part of building a computer isn't designing arithmetic units and things like that. It's the control, the brain. So if the data path is the brain is the control. So that's the hard thing to control. So it turns out a Turing Award winner, Maurice Wilkes, knew that. He built kind of the first operational computer, and he came up with this idea that he called microprogramming. Is we can specify control as a matrix, and you could think of putting in the zeros and ones. The control is like programming, and he called it microprogramming. So in the 1970s, most computers control was done as microprogramming. So, including the computers we were doing at Hughes Aircraft. And so the idea was, why don't I make software to make it easier to write microprograms?
Okay.
And so that was what my dissertation was about.
And how interested was your PhD advisor in this? How interested was the community? Did this seem an exciting idea?
My advisor, my advisor who had stuck with me all this time was willing to supervise this area. I was supporting myself at Hughes. It wasn't something that he was an expert in. He was more kind of in programming languages and correctness. So my actual dissertation was building a language to write programs and a verification system to prove that microprograms were correct.
Right.
Which he was much more interested in the verification side of things. But it was more incidental to his research rather than mainline to it.
I assume the dissertation was well received, and you graduate with some broader recognition.
I eventually, after, what's the greatest thing about being in the field a long time, at the time it took me I had a wife and 2 kids, but it took me 7.5 years to graduate.
Right.
Back then, that was a long time.
Right.
These days, it's kind of average.
Right.
Now, it comes to probably the next question is, how did I get a job?
How'd you get a job?
Yeah. So what happens is, my wife was born up here in Northern California and lived, her parents went to Berkeley High School, and she lived here since she was 11 years old.
Well, she got a great education. Berkeley High was amazing.
Well, my parents-in-law did that, right? And so my wife was here till she was 11. Then her parents moved to Southern California, where I met with her. But she loved, Berkeley area and always wanted to move back. So I'm now applying for jobs. Like most people, I'm applying for both industry and academic jobs. And she keeps asking me, what about Berkeley? And I said, she didn't understand the academics well. And I said, look, Berkeley's up here, UCLA's out here. Yeah. It's really, somebody graduating from here doesn't go to there. That's just, you just don't understand academics. But, I started getting job offers like from Bell Labs and nice places like that. And I said, and she said, what about Berkeley? And I said, okay. And she, call them up. So she forced me as a graduate student, a PhD student at UCLA, to call the head of the department at UCLA, head of computer science, to ask about my application. So she forced me to do it. So I still remember putting my finger in my ear, put the phone up, and hi, this is Dave. Berkeley's the one place I hadn't heard of that if you were interested, I'd take it seriously, but I'm getting into other offers. I was speaking to Elwin Berlekamp, kind of a world famous person in games, but kind of a mumbler, so it's kind of hard to understand. And he says, well, Dave, I got your application here, and you're in the top 10, but not the top 5. And I remember, thanks very much, Professor Berlekamp, and I was completely relieved. That was just, I thought it was going to be so much worse. My wife made me do it. So I hang up, I heard the story on this side, he hangs up, he finds out, he said that to anybody who called.
Really?
You're in the top 10, but not the top 5. It's just a nice thing to say. But he takes my application out and looks at it, and there was a colleague that they wanted to build up the hardware piece of it, and he was heading to Southern California anyway, so he thought he'd drop by and talk to me. He did. We had a nice conversation. I got invited up here to have an interview. That went well, and I got a job. But in terms of my kind of career preparation, as I visited, I said, well, I could either do software things or hardware things, but most people were interested in software. But Berkeley was trying to build up their hardware, the architecture thing. That's specifically what it was. Well, I could do that. And so that led to the job offer for Berkeley.
So I'm going to roll back just a minute, not so much in your life as to an issue, which is that decision point between academia and industry. What goes into it? I mean, you wanted a good job, you wanted to support your family and so forth, but were the implications profound as to whether you wound up in industry or academia? Next
part of the story. So we were the first ones in our family to get married, but while I'm this longtime graduate student, which was not welcome by my in-laws, they referred to staying in school for a long time as pulling a Dave. So that's me. So I thought, and later they called it pulling Dave. So I thought, my career turned out pretty well. But even 20 years later, when my sister-in-law's daughter marries, she marries a guy who got, I think, an MBA and then a law degree, and she referred to him while I was there as pulling a Dave. So that was a part of the family folklore. Okay, but going back, so our younger sisters get married. they get cars and houses, and we're still living in merit student housing. It seems like there ought to be a rule against that. So clearly my wife and my sons had sacrificed a lot for me to be a graduate student. And so it's time to make a decision. Well,
Right.
you know, that was up to my wife. You know, she had sacrificed a lot, and so I said, look, we've got this job offer at Berkeley, and we got the actual offer letter, and the original letter was $13,500. And even if we account for inflation, that's like $50,000 a year. I think actually what it was I got the offer in May, and I think what they do is give you you'll get a bonus once you actually finish your PhD. Right. So just in case that wasn't, you needed more. Right. So they're going to lowball you because they want to make sure you finish that PhD. Right. And I actually got maybe 10% more, but the time is $13,500, and that's all I knew. So I said, look, Linda, it's your decision. You sacrificed a lot. So she asked me 2 questions. Well, Dave, if we go to industry and get more money, can we later go to Berkeley? No. And I said, okay, if we go to Berkeley and we want to change our minds, can we later go to industry? Yes. So she thinks it over, says, okay, we'll be poor but proud. But that was the decision. Had she picked the other route, I would have been disappointed, but you know, what else could I have done?
But what would the implications of that have been? Of course, that's the road not taken, but you know how people who went to industry...
you know, I actually... followed up with the guys I was at Hughes Aircraft with kind of 20-ish years later, 20, 25 years later, they were, you know, they were, some of them were retired, and I thought, wow, they're much younger than me, they must have done really well. No, what was happening was the aerospace industry was collapsing, and companies were acquiring each other, and they were starting to lay people off. So, I mean, that would have been a pretty, had I just stayed at Hughes Aircraft all those years, that would have been a not very exciting thing. And in fact, when I met them like 20 years later, they were still talking about some of the same airplanes that I remember them talking about back then.
That's what I'm wondering about, whether, because in the end, you achieved quite a bit in the field, whether it would have been constrained by those circumstances. I mean, we don't know. You know, you may have pursued the ideas in any case, but... Yeah,
it would have been, I think the question would have been, you know, we were close to my family and everybody was in Southern California. Would I have stayed at Hughes to be near my family, or would we have recognized the Linda's desire to move to Northern California and gone work for Intel or something?
Right,
like
which
that.
would have been
as
intellectually, not just financially, as intellectually exciting.
Yeah, because the aerospace industry, you know, is a trailing technology industry, right? And for some things like missiles or something, I'm sure they're the best in the world at, but they tend to be way behind everything else. They didn't need to be at the state of the art.
So Berkeley was the right choice, for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
Broadly, that's a big question. I'm sure I hope it can be answered in a brief way, but the state of thinking about the computer at that point. I mean, when you enter Berkeley as a junior faculty member, and the state of the field, or at least the state of the field at Berkeley.
There's 2 things there. Berkeley is, in computer science, is not one of the top departments. The top 3 departments are Stanford, MIT, and Carnegie Mellon, or maybe the order is even Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, MIT at that time. They're heavily funded by DARPA, and they're the big 3. Right. Berkeley is probably number 4, but a distant number 4. Berkeley doesn't have any of the DARPA funding, and that's the big distinguishing factor. They had some DARPA funding a few years before, but that project kind of crashed and burned, literally, apparently, as the person who was leading it, you know, the computers they were building caught fire. There was earlier ones that had some all-star people in it, but they had gone and started what they called Berkeley Computer Corporation, a startup company that left Berkeley and all these fantastic people. That didn't do very well, but they became kind of the core of Xerox PARC. So this was Butler Lamps and Chuck Thacker, 2 Turing Award winners, were in that collection that used to be at Berkeley, did the startup company, and then were the people who made Xerox PARC happened.
Is that before your time?
That's all before my time.
Okay, so you're arriving.
So Berkeley's kind of lost that systems building piece,
right?
And they want to build it back up, and that's
that's you.
Part of.
That's partially.
I'm one of the people. They wanted to build back up that strength that they used to have.
Okay, so get me to your insight, which begins the insight. Which you did together with Hennessy, or actually pointed the way.
Well, before that, the guy who helped recruit me, or who interviewed me, and then recommended me for the interview was Al Despain. So when I came back, I liked the idea of having a more senior mentor. He was an associate professor. Also, Carlos Secan, who had been at Bell Labs, had just been visiting and had just joined. So that we were two hires. Despain was recruited from University of Utah just a couple of years before to try and build up this area, and so Carlo and I and Al started off working together.
Mm-hmm.
So he, he was kind of philosophical, and we had these great ideas of how computers should be designed, and did this project that he called X-Tree that was extraordinarily ambitious. We were going to design our own microprocessor, our own operating system, build a multiprocessor, all these big ideas. Sadly, we had absolutely no resources, no research funding or anything like that. So in surprisingly kind of 3 years into my career at Berkeley, I'm contacted by some people at Digital Equipment, who was one of the leading computer manufacturers at that time.
Yes.
In 1979, and asked me if the person who used to be a professor at Carnegie Mellon, Sam Fuller, who's now at Digital Equipment Corporation, says, I remember your dissertation on microprogramming and verification. We're building these mini computers that have huge amounts of microcode and all kinds of bugs. How'd you like to come spend a sabbatical, and we'll use your ideas in your dissertation in the real world?
Extraordinary.
Very cool.
Very cool.
So we do a sabbatical in Boston in the fall of '79, but it had this other consequences. I tried to describe the project we were doing on at Berkeley, and nobody had heard of it, and it gave me some time to think about. Well, this is extraordinarily ambitious, and we don't have any resources. Can you really do this in a university? And basically, I took that pause in my career to come back and think about what you can do in the universities, what you can't do in universities. And came back, and right after that, I came back in January of 1980. That's when we started the RISC project. So I ended up doing that on my own. The ideas had been in the air a little bit. I had done a graduate project in what was called high-level language computer architecture, where the theory was what you should do is build really complicated computers that were much closer to the semantics of the languages, and that was going to make better computers and make software easier. And we had studied that material in the graduate courses and thought it didn't make a lot of sense. You shouldn't be doing things in hardware, you should use compilers more. And that and kind of the microprogramming stuff was kind of a natural segue into reduced instruction set computers. And then plus kind of my recognition that one of the opportunities you could have at a university is you could tie your research to courses, because courses had deadlines, right? Academia doesn't have deadlines, but courses have deadlines. So if I could put the research ideas associated with courses, we could make pretty rapid progress with deadlines and get students to volunteer by taking these courses to work on it. So that was, the sabbatical gave me the opportunity to think and have the insight. And fortunately, in my fourth year, I started working on the RISC stuff and did a series of 4 courses where the first one was investigate the ideas, and then to learn about how to design chips, and then 2 courses where we actually built the first RISC microprocessor. So in a series of 4 courses, we built the first RISC microprocessor.
Now, it's not that everybody is leaping up and saying you're on the right track at this point.
Nope.
So
what happens is the spring, I think it's the spring semester. So we're starting to investigate these ideas and starting to modify compilers and simulators and stuff, and starting to get an idea that this might be an interesting idea. So I write a paper that's called The Case for the Reduced Instruction Set Computer. Yes. And I write that during the summer and send it to a non-refereed publication called Computer Architecture News.
Right.
And before I send it out, I send it to friends to get their feedback. And one of my former students, Dave Ditzel, really liked it and made a lot of comments. So I asked him if he wanted to be a co-author. And also, as part of my nature, for some reason, I get feedback from other people about it. I also sent it to my friends at DEC. And they were building, this really, and the reduced instruction set computer idea is if we think of computers, when software talks to hardware, hardware has a vocabulary. You have to speak. You have to use the words of the computer's vocabulary. And as I said, the philosophy at the time was to have a very rich vocabulary, which this microprogramming stuff made easier to do. And we were arguing in the reduced instruction set computer, that's the wrong way to go. With Moore's law and things rapidly changing, you should have a small vocabulary of simple words, which would make this microprogramming even unnecessary.
So totally against common sense in the field.
The conventional wisdom was kind of software is hard to build because computer vocabularies are too primitive. And this is the bane of all of our problems. And so when I wrote this paper, my friends at DEC wrote a contrarian paper. And so these two papers, the case for the reduced instruction set computer and comments on the case for reduced instruction computer, showed up in people's mailboxes at the same time. And they were, like this, right? And so this was really interesting. Controversy, different ideas, and VLSI, microprocessors, microchips. Where should things go? And so this got tremendous attention, and where the reduced instruction set computer side was, a small minority. So fortunately, John Hennessy started working in this area. We were both funded by DARPA, and he started doing the design as well. And fortunately for me, despite Berkeley and Stanford being rivals as local competitors, I recognized that here's somebody, we're on the same side of this argument. I need as much help as I can get. And so, I welcomed John's help on this area, and he and I and people at IBM who were also in this area, we were on the same team, and we would participate in debates at these conferences, arguing the case for reduced instruction computers. And there's plenty of people on the other side arguing the other side, but over, I'd say, the course of like 18 months, there were 3 or 4 of these debates that John and I participated in. And we kind of switched the intellectual argument around. People could see, okay, I understand technically why this might be true. Then the next question is, but is this commercially relevant, right? But it's like, technically, okay, you guys were heretics before, maybe what you're saying makes some sense. But, it's just an academic pipe dream. This will never have impact. It's like changing, like railroads have a certain gauge. You guys are proposing to change the gauge of the railroad. It'll never happen. So
the temperamental elements in both of you is stubbornness, or knowing that you're right when a lot of people are telling you you're wrong? Why do you keep going?
I would say, John, first of all, John and I we grew up on the opposite coast. He's Catholic. We both were in large families. We went to big public schools, but we were very much alike in our worldview. That's why we were such good co-authors, collaborators together. I think we're both optimistic. I think we just believed our arguments were right? We're logical people. Here's the set of arguments. If semiconductor technology is changing fast, it makes more sense to have a simple instruction set that can track the fast-changing technology. And compilers are the right thing to close that gap, not hardware, because it'll take you longer to build the hardware if it's really complicated. So we just thought these are the right arguments, that matches microprocessor technology. So we were convinced of the correctness of our thoughts, and we're willing to be convinced otherwise, which we participate in the debates, but nobody changed our minds. Nobody came up with the arguments, except the fact that this will never fly commercially.
Right.
So John started a company, MIPS, which was named after his Stanford project. And I started consulting for Sun Microsystems, where they decided one of our former graduate students at Berkeley, was one of the founders of MIPS. This was Bill Joy. And even despite Sun Microsystems being a pretty young company, in the back of his mind, he thought the risk ideas were the right things to do. He couldn't buy them, so he decided or convinced the leadership that they should start their own RISC project to build their own microprocessors by being a small company, because these are better ideas than buying microprocessors from Intel or Motorola. I'm
very interested and talked about it with John as well, about this relationship now in a very different question from industry versus academia, the extent to which industry can, in your field, be a good testing ground, that it carries through an idea in another form and helps you do the thinking about it, or maybe just the condensing about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of, certainly my reaction, and I think a lot of students when they go to college and they take these really provocative, thoughtful courses, is some of the humanities and social sciences field, it's like, you'll never be able to figure this out, right? That's, okay, here's two opposing ideas. How are you going to decide who's right? And what's kind of nice about engineering and sciences is you can have these diametrically opposed ideas, but there's experiments you can try and do to see which one wins so you can make progress. For us in computer architecture, that test field is, besides you building your prototypes, is basically industry. Your success is transferring your ideas into industry. They're able to make better computers because that's how everybody gets to have a computer. You buy them, right? It's not you're going to make them yourself. So our ultimate testing of our ideas is the marketplace, which has, it's not a perfect testing point because it can have other reasons for success other than your technical ideas. But if you're successful, the technical ideas play an important role and can be the enabling role. But that's kind of where we settle the architecture debates. It often involves spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. Oh. But companies will make these bets, build computers in this new way, and if they're right, it can be successful for decades. And if they're wrong, they could lose a lot of money.
There's nobody on the other side now on this point, right?
Today, for RISC stuff, yeah, not today. In terms of number of chips sold, it's overwhelming, 99%. Intel kept pushing their style of instruction set, which had heavily microcode. It's still for sale today, still dominates the cloud, but the cloud is a very small piece of the overall marketplace.
Is the rest of your career building on these insights, or do you take on other issues and challenges?
So I think we ended up doing kind of 2 generations of the RISC processor through those courses, and we did 2 more research projects that did RISC processors. So kind of, as we look back retrospectively, we could think of them as RISC 1 through RISC 4 at Berkeley. After that, we just, I think one of the things I didn't say is when I came here as assistant professor and I got advice of what to do, they said, look, Berkeley doesn't count the number of papers you publish. Berkeley wants impact. And I love that. I just love that challenge. Impact, we want you to change the world. And I don't know if that was actually, whether they really backed that up, but that's what they told me. And so I love that. We want to impact change the world. So after the RISC stuff, which started having pickup, my colleague Randy Katz had a Macintosh, and the first Macintosh at the time, as you remember, did not have a hard disk. They were floppy disks, which were terrible. And then he got the first personal computer disk sitting next to his Macintosh, and he said, that's interesting. I wonder what we could do with that. So Randy and I led an effort of replacing disks in the big computers, which were the size of washing machines. And we said, why not replace them with 40 of these little PC disks? And then we kind of calculated, since disks are rotating, you could have tremendously more performance and better latency from 40 small disks, one big one. And then we kind of wrote those ideas out and sent it to a colleague in industry, and he said, pretty interesting ideas in terms of performance, but by the way, the chances of 40 things failing is basically 40 times higher that one of 40 would fail than one thing failing. So, that's a bad idea. So we said, okay, we got to work on reliability. So the idea was to take the 40 small ones and add some more so we'd have redundant ones, so in case one failed. And if you do it right, actually, 44 of them can be more reliable than the one big one. And so the name of that project was Redundant Array of inexpensive disks, where the inexpensive being PC disks. That's called RAID.
Great.
So that project was also very popular and had, really big impact. Lots of people, everybody uses it today. Yeah.
We're heading to the end of a too short conversation, but everybody's going to be angry at me if I don't talk to somebody who's been so invested in computer architecture about the present. I mean, you have already said in certain contexts that this is actually an exciting period. You guys didn't do it all. All the questions have not been answered. What's exciting about this period in computer architecture?
Well, my whole career we've had Moore's Law. Since I graduated from high school, there's been Moore's Law, and it's over. And Moore's Law was doubling the number of transistors originally every year. He predicted then every 2 years. And it's shocking that it's over. And people even today, even in my department, don't want to believe it's over. But the data is clear it's over. And that has driven computer design for a long time. People still want faster, lower power computers despite the end of Moore's Law. So that involves what people like Hennessy and I do. We have to come up with new designs of computers even though the transistors aren't any better. So it puts more of the emphasis on computer architects. That's why we think this is going to be a golden age of computer architecture, which our article, that's the title of our Turing Award lecture.
So again, you don't have to be a prophet if you don't want to, but a number of years from now, 5, 10, what will be possible?
Yeah, well, we definitely, I think, to me, it's pretty clear that the computing is exciting at the two ends, in the cloud and at the edge.
Okay.
Right? That's where things are going to happen. There's this new, I think we're in the middle of another transforming paradigm. So in my career, the microprocessor changed the world, the internet changed the world. I think machine learning is one of those. And what's exciting about machine learning is they need tremendously more compute power. Basically, the first word is machine. For it to learn, you need a lot of machines. So here's a group that needs as much computing power as we can build, right when Moore's Law is ending.
Right.
So what architects believe is that it's hard to build faster general purpose microprocessors. That's really hard to do. Maybe instead of doubling every 18 months like they did during the RISC era, maybe they're going to double every 20 years. But building something just for one relatively narrow area, like machine learning, there's huge opportunities there. So there's tremendous excitement right now, both at big companies and at startups, in building dedicated computer architectures to make machine learning work. And it's a very heady time.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Always nice to end at heady time.